To and everyone, how are you all doing? Hope you're having a good day. I'm going to sneak in another little drink of tea, but I'll hold off. Um, Interesting weather today. It's neither sunny, it is cloudy, not raining, just kind of a mixed day. Hope your day's going well. Why are you here? Not here in this broadcast or podcast. Why are you here on this earth? Do you ever give that much thought? And how do you, excuse me, how do you answer that question? How do we know why we're here? I think a lot of people just go through life, living life, but not understanding that life has purpose to it. It's meant to have purpose to it. And obviously, uh, being as this is a Christian podcast, your purpose is meant to be found in God. It's something that you should be aware of, that I should be aware of. God's calling on our lives, both in general, in terms of being ever more Christ-like, but also in the specifics of what it is that we should be investing our time and our energy and our passions in. We are drawing to a conclusion in our series in Colossians. One more lesson after this one. We are actually backing all the way up to the beginning because we're taking a look at this guy named Paul, the Apostle Paul, who wrote the letter. He didn't know the Colossians. He hadn't been to Colossae. He didn't know them personally, but he did know them. He knew them through a guy named Epaphras, who had led quite a few people to the Lord and then gathered them together as a church. And so we're just asking the question, who is this guy named Paul that wrote this letter? And so I wanted to back up into chapter 1 and look again at a number of things about him. And one of the things that really strikes me is how Paul understood who he was and what his calling was from God. You and I are not called to be apostles. I get that. But we're all called to be something in the Lord. And let's at least walk away with that today as we look at what Paul said about himself. Starts off the letter from the very beginning with, as was the custom of the day, you didn't wait till the end of the letter to identify who you were. You actually said it right off the bat. We put our names at the end of letters. I think they actually had it right, putting their name on the front end. And Paul simply says this, Paul, an apostle of Christ Jesus, by the will of God. This was God's choice for him. And if you're familiar with the story at all, you know that Paul was actually heading in the opposite direction of ever being a Christian, let alone an apostle, let alone somebody who's out there proclaiming Christ. He was actually persecuting Christians. Uh, how does Acts put it? Murderous threats, I believe is the wording in Acts. Like he was passionate in his hatred of Christians. There's a lot of hatred of Christians today in our world. Always has been, always will be. Jesus warned us, this is the way it's going to be. They hated me, they're going to hate you, he said. And people always have a reason and a defense for why they hate Christians. So in their mind, they're not hating Christians. Paul would not have seen it as hating Christians. Paul saw it as being zealous for Judaism. And he saw Christianity rather than an outgrowth of Judaism, he saw it as an attack on Judaism. And so he was doing all he could to stamp it down. And yet God had his hand on Paul, saved him in a very miraculous way, and then made him an apostle. That was God's will for him. Paul understood that. And Paul developed his life and led his life around that understanding of who God called him to be. Back to our text at hand. If my share button will cooperate. Grace and peace to you from God our Father. Now, verse 9. For this reason, since the day we heard about you, we, including Paul, have not stopped praying for you. Um, I don't know about you. Like, I'm okay with short little prayers talking to God. I have the hardest time with longer prayers. Uh, I can respect those who can pray a long time. I find that when I do sometimes, like my mind wanders, and this isn't just in prayer time. This is like in any, it can be anywhere. I often find that I pray and then my mind wanders. I bring myself back on track. I pray some more. My mind wanders to some things and thinking about this, and then back on track. And on one hand, I don't want us beating ourselves up. If you are honestly speaking to the Lord, whether short or long, committing your life to Him, confessing your sin, calling on Him for help, praising Him, honoring Him, even if it's in short little bursts, good for you. We ought to be a praying people. That's the takeaway from Paul's life. We ought to be a praying people. But Paul actually, I think, looked up to people like Epaphras, who at the end of the book of Colossians, it says that he labors really hard for you in prayer. And that's part of the we have not stopped praying for you. So that's the second thing. Paul understood his calling from God. Paul was a praying man. Paul was a suffering man. Now I rejoice in what I am suffering for you, and I fill up in my flesh. That's where he was suffering. What is still lacking in regard to Christ's afflictions for the sake of the body, which is the church? A very curious uh, way to say that suffering is an integral part of your Christian experience. Jesus suffered, we will suffer. Don't be sucked in by preachers and people on the internet, on TV, or whatever that promise you that if you follow Jesus, things will just get better, better, better. You can't outgive God. Give God $100, He'll give you $1,000. Don't buy into all that stuff. Yes, God will bless you in God's way beyond what you can imagine, but it also will include walking the path of suffering. That is part of what it means to follow Jesus. And suffering is never pleasant in and of itself. For Paul, it meant a great deal of things, but when he says, I fill up in my flesh, remember on Wednesday? No, this is Wednesday. On Monday, when we talked about Paul had severe eyesight problems, such that by this point, when he's writing to the Colossians, he's only signing the end of the letter. Just 8 years earlier, when he was writing the Galatians, he talked about how he wrote the letter about in large letters. They didn't have glasses back then like we have now. We should be very grateful for readers and eyeglasses. He no doubt suffered in other ways in his body. Body suffering to me is one of the harder things to deal with. But he did it in the Lord for them. All right, we're going to run out of time before we get here, so I better start moving this along. I have become its servant. A servant heart is part of your calling. I don't care whether it's Paul the apostle or Scott the pastor or you, whatever you are. We are called to be servants to one another and have a servant's heart, because this was part of the commission that God gave him. He didn't just say, you're going to be somebody important. You're going to be an apostle. I mean, that was a big deal back in the day. You weren't any higher up the list of people than an apostle, but they weren't to become proud about it. They were to think of themselves as servants of the people and servants of the Lord, because this is the commission that God gave Paul. It's the same commission he gives each one of us. But here's the part I really love. He, Jesus, is the one we proclaim. In all the different things that Paul did, he never lost sight of why he did it. I have the opportunity to go out and recruit new workers for NAME. And inevitably, the discussion will always come down to what is it that you guys do at NAME? And I have to explain the difference between a platform and what we do. The platform is simply that's what you're kind of doing. It could be we have a lady in Campbell River that teaches other ladies how to cook, restaurant cooking, right? We've had people that did music. We've had school teachers, translators, people that just become part of a community, pastors like myself, all kinds of imaginable ways. Those are just platforms. But the thing that we're actually doing is talking to other people about Jesus and calling them to become Jesus followers. Paul never lost sight of that in all the different stuff that he went through and all the stuff he did from the very beginning of when he became a believer to the day that he died a martyr's death. It was all about Jesus and talking to other people as fearlessly as he could about Jesus. We share the same calling in our lives. And finally, he said, and I'll end with this, to this end, I strenuously contend. He worked hard at it and he faced opposition. That's what the word contend means. He was up against Satan and he was up against people like himself before he became a Christian. He was up against people that were anti-Christian. He had to contend with them, but in it, he worked hard at it because he was passionate about Jesus and who he is and sharing that message with other people. So Paul was a man who knew who he was and what his calling was from God. So ultimately, when we ask ourselves the question, why am I here? We're meant to find the answer in God. What is his will for our lives? And that should become the defining thing in our lives, regardless of what we're doing, where we are. That should become the defining thing in our lives. So I want to take a brief look on Friday from another passage that we just get a glimpse into who Paul was. And then on Monday, I would like to maybe conclude it with what is the main point to the book of Colossians? What is this whole book actually all about? We spent almost 80 lessons, but it's really about one thing. And I want to cover that on Monday. So, Lord willing, I hope we all are able to meet together there. But between now and then, I hope you have a good couple days, and I look forward to seeing you then.